Hi, I'm Cody, and I'm here today with Olivia, Hannah, and Gabriel to discuss India and the oil industry. Here's a few interesting facts that you may not have known. Chess was invented in India, and until 1896, India was the only source of diamonds in the world. India has the largest number of post offices. Yoga was originated in India, and the world's first university was established in India. And today we'll be talking about exploration, history of oil, variables that move oil, and culture and politics in India. India is located in Southeast Asia and is surrounded by Pakistan, Myanmar, China, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Bhutan. Its southern tip is bordered by the Indian Ocean. Oil exploration in India was an up-and-coming trend in the middle to late 1800s. The very first well commenced in 1866 was by McKillop Stewart Company, but was proven unsuccessful when it came to production. The well is located in Assam in eastern India, which is a popular place for exploration during this time. The next area to be explored in eastern India was Digboi in 1889. This was where the Assam Railway and Trading Company made the first commercial discovery of crude oil. Throughout the 1800s and early 1900s, oil exploration took place only onshore in India. It wasn't until 1962 that offshore exploration began. A large structure was also discovered in Bombay through seismic surveys and was later taken up for drilling in 1974. The line of control refers to the military control line between the Indian and Pakistani controlled parts of Kashmir and Jammu. Because of its existence, certain areas are not open to exploration in India. A majority of the issues have to do with the government, who form production sharing contracts. These contracts protect the government, who owns the natural resources. Other problems include recovery costs of exploration as well as additional development costs. Lastly, audit rights can be a challenge. If the auditor goes beyond the scope during audits, the government and contractors can experience major revenue issues. Cairn India is an oil and gas company based in India who is a prime example of a company who uses technological advances to maximize recovery and manage reservoirs today. Some of the technological advances include seismic data, single sensor recording, steerable streamer capabilities, larger streamer configurations, and GeoStreamer acquisition.
After the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of British control in India, India began the long road to liberalization and globalizing their economy. Although you can see from the graph that coal is India's primary energy source. Due to increases in transportation, the demand for petroleum has begun to rise. To keep up with this expanding market, the Indian government has been working to find a reliable supplier of oil. India is the world's sixth largest importer of oil. They rely heavily on importation to supply their oil. Before its collapse, the Soviet Union supplied most of India's oil. However, India has had to reinvent their economic policies from those of oppression to globalization and capitalism in order to supply their oil and keep up with their expanding transportation market. This new policy of capitalism has obviously allowed India to expand its imports and supply more oil for its economy. From the graph, you can see that during its time under British rule from 1900 to 1980, and even into 1990, where the Soviet Union was still supplying oil, India's imports remained relatively stable. However, globalizing their market has allowed them to increase the amount of oil they bring into their country. Although India's presence in global affairs had become more prominent, it proved difficult for India to procure a constant and reliable energy supplier. The Caspian region became a topic of interest for oil supply, with the talk of building a pipeline directly from the Caspian region to the Mediterranean. Competition for the Caspian Sea's hydrocarbon reserves grew fierce, and two pipelines, the BTC and the BTE, were constructed, with talks of a third project coined Nabucco. Nabucco was proposed as a pipeline connecting hydrocarbon reserves between Turkey, Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, and Austria. The construction of the BTC, which would run parallel to the future Nabucco pipelines, allowed for the Western countries to gain access to oil reserves in Turkey. Nabucco succeeded in supplying gas to Bulgaria via oil-rich Azerbaijan in 2008, Both the victories of the BTC and Nabucco marked a new era of Western access to Caspian oil supplies and an attempt to thwart Russia's monopoly on Eastern oil reserves. Although the West was thriving in its attempts to engage the Caspian oil trade, no such progress was being made toward providing Southeast Asia with energy resources, despite these countries' exponentially increasing need for oil. With Russia on the outskirts of this progress, India was left vying for itself. Next, we'll be talking about the TAPI, IPI pipelines in competition with China. A map of the TAPI and IPI pipelines is shown. The TAPI pipeline, which is a proposed pipeline between Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India, is shown in yellow, while the IPI, which is a proposed pipeline between Iran, Pakistan, and India, is in red. With the development of these pipelines, it looked as though India was finally getting a hold on Caspian oil supplies. However, political differences in Afghanistan and Pakistan proved too great. The United States also heavily approved of IPI and made attempts to thwart such plans due to Iran's involvement. The Indian-Chinese competition has always been fierce, as both countries have long competed to join the inner circle of countries who benefit from the oil-rich Caspian region reserves, as well as try to globalize their market and gain as many suppliers as possible. The Iran-Pakistan relations create stress in creating the IPI and TAPI pipelines. The Chinese government has outbid India for oil in Turkmenistan. The China National Petroleum Company has invested $45 billion in potential oil suppliers and exploration. The Oil and Natural Gas Corporation and Indian Oil Corporation have only devoted $3.5 billion to its energy globalization plan.
Moving on now to the topic of how expensive oil is in India. There are really a lot of factors that change the price of oil, and actually most of these factors will change the price of oil around the world. It isn't just one country that will be affected. We'll be focusing on 10 factors that 2 articles focus on. The 2 articles are Nick Cunningham's article from oilprice.com and another one written by Clover Global Solutions that focuses on the same ideas. Looking now at probably the biggest factor that changes oil prices in the world is who controls the production, really. And OPEC, or the Organization of Petroleum and Exporting Countries, they produce 40% of the world's oil. And if they control this amount, they can probably actually control the prices very well too, because they are controlling how much oil is being produced. So the countries that are in this organization are Algeria, Angola, Ecuador, Indonesia, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Libya, Nigeria, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Venezuela. And again, these countries do a really good job of controlling how much oil is actually in production and how much of that oil is actually getting out to the front lines. If a company does a really good job of restricting supply of a product, the demand will actually rise up. That's what makes this principle the second most influential factor, just because countries are able to stop the flow of oil coming into the market, increasing the demand. When the demand goes up, the prices can go up as well. You see this kind of reverse also the other way. When you have an excess of supply in the market, there won't be as high as a demand in the market for oil in this situation. And you see this happening right now around the world, where there's a lot of oil being produced and not enough people to buy the oil. That's why prices are plummeting, because people still need to make profit off of it. And it's because of this reason that OPEC has such a big role in the market and in the market control, because they can control the supply. And in doing that, they can actually manipulate the demand of the market. So what's the government's role in all this? Well, as usual, the government does play a big role in oil and the price that is at the pump. Why? Well, because typically oil is taxed when it's imported. And however much it's taxed will either increase or decrease the price of oil at the pump. The government also decides how much oil is actually being imported to the country. And of course, back to supply and demand, if the Prime Minister of India is not letting enough oil in for its huge population of 1.2 billion people, then obviously it's not going to be working out really well for people at the pump, because there's going to be a huge demand for oil in the country. Probably the most relevant factor right now that's influencing the prices of oil at the pump is the political unrest and the violence in the Middle East right now. What's happening is people are withdrawing their research and their investment into that area because of what's going on. In turn, there's less money being produced from that area, and that's causing the governments there to produce a lot of oil at a low price because they have to make up the money and make more profit as fast as possible. Obviously, back to supply and demand, if you have more oil on the market than you're needing or just producing a lot of it for no reason, then the prices will plummet. And that's what's happening right now, and that's why this factor is so relevant at the moment. There are more factors to production than just how much oil you're producing. It's also the cost of that production, and that has many factors that affect it. Like, for instance, where you're actually pulling the oil out of the ground is really important. If you're onshore producing shale oil, at the moment, that's a lot less expensive than investing in an offshore rig. Not only because the technologies of fracking have helped reduce the price of producing shale oil, but also it's helped because it's a lot less dangerous to produce onshore because there isn't as much risk involved. So you're not paying as much insurance onshore. So again, all these things play a huge role in the cost of production, and the cost of production will determine the price of gas at the pump. The economic strength of a country is also important because however strong a country is economically, they will have more oil readily available to the population that can actually use it. So in doing this, they'll have more oil consumption per person, and that will increase the demand. One factor that is often discounted and not really considered a big deal is weather. Right now, the polar ice caps are receding, and that's exposing more ocean space where oil is located. This automatically increases the reserves of oil, and that in turn increases the supply. And we already said that with more supply, the prices will actually drop because it won't be as sought after. Speculative buying at its heart is essentially buying and selling future production contracts. If it's speculated that the world will need more oil at some point, people are going to actually buy more of these contracts and actually produce more oil at that point in time. If the demand doesn't follow suit, then the price is going to drop dramatically because there's an excess of supply in the market. Global exchange rates are pretty important because American dollars are what oil is traded in. If the dollar is strong relative to the country it's trading to, there is less real money in that country, and the demand will decrease in that country, and the price of oil will drop because of this. If the dollar is weaker, there's more real money in that country, and demand will increase because the country will want to purchase more oil at that price. This will shoot up prices in that country. Over the past few years, countries like China, India, and Saudi Arabia have seen lots of economic development in their country. Countries like these that are not a part of the OECD, or Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, have seen a 40% increase in oil consumption. As mentioned previously, countries that have higher economic standing have more access to oil and a bigger need for oil. So looking now at India specifically, the price of oil in that country will continue to increase as economic productivity increases.
This section is an overview of the cultural and political effects on the Indian oil industry. The changing Indian society has a huge impact on their oil industry. The modernization and growth of the population, as demonstrated by the graph, fuels the demand for energy. Since 1995, the population's consumption of oil and gas has increased by 160%. These cultural changes push the industry not only to increase production, but become more efficient and competitive in the industry. India's changing society and culture isn't the only factor affecting the oil industry. Government policies, such as the new exploration licensing policy, and political parties such as the Indian National Congress play a huge part. The new exploration licensing policy helps to ensure the demand of the growing nation can be met. It also protects the growth and expansion of the industry. While policies affect the production, political parties affect the market. The Indian National Congress supported moderate socialism and a mixed economy, but now support deregulation, privatization, and foreign investment. These political elements help to expand the Indian oil industry.